Charles Manson, a name that has become synonymous with madness, manipulation, and one of the most disturbing crime sprees in American history. He wasn't the killer in the traditional sense. He didn't hold the knife, pull the trigger, or leave his own fingerprints at the scenes. But he created a world, a distorted ideology, where others committed murder for him. This is the story of who Charles Manson was, how he built a cult known as the Family, the crimes they committed, and how it all came crashing down. Charles Miles Manson was born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was only 16 years old, struggling with poverty and instability. Manson's early childhood was chaotic. He bounced between relatives, spent time in juvenile institutions, and quickly learned that manipulation was a way to survive. By his teenage years, Manson was already committing thefts, burglaries, and escaping from multiple reform schools. He spent so much of his youth in correctional institutions that prison became more familiar to him than home. In 1955, he married a waitress named Rosalie Willis, but this didn't stop his criminal behavior. Not long after, he was arrested again for car theft. While Manson was in prison, Rosalie left him, taking their newborn son with her. Throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s, Manson alternated between brief periods of freedom and years behind bars. Prisons became the place where he read obsessively, studied psychology, practiced manipulation, and told others he wanted to become a musician. By 1967, Manson had spent more than half his life locked up. When he was released in March that year, he was 32 years old, unemployed, uneducated, but charismatic in a strange way, and hungry for control. When Manson arrived in San Francisco during the height of the 1960s counterculture movement, he blended effortlessly into the era's themes of freedom, anti-establishment thinking, and spiritual exploration. He began attracting followers, mostly young women who were searching for meaning, belonging, or escape. Manson presented himself as a philosopher, a spiritual guide, and a musician influenced by the Beatles. He used a mix of flattery, manipulation, LSD, and psychological pressure to break down his followers' identities and rebuild them in his image. This group eventually evolved into what became known as the Manson Family. They traveled together in old buses, lived communally, and eventually settled at the Spahn Ranch, a decaying movie set outside Los Angeles. Here, Manson's control deepened. He preached about a coming apocalyptic race war, which he called Helter Skelter, a term he borrowed from a Beatles song but twisted into his own violent prophecy. Within the family, Manson became a near mythical figure. He controlled every aspect of their lives, their food, their sleep, their relationships. He told them that individuality was an illusion and that true loyalty meant obeying him without question. By 1969, the family consisted of dozens of members, but the core group, the ones who would later commit the murders, were deeply loyal and psychologically dependent on Manson. In the summer of 1969, Manson's music ambitions failed. His predictions of chaos hadn't come true, and tensions at Spahn Ranch were escalating. Manson grew increasingly paranoid and unstable. He began speaking more aggressively about triggering the racial war he believed was coming. Manson told his followers that drastic action was needed. If the world wouldn't spark Helter Skelter on its own, then they would do it for him. He selected followers he believed were the most obedient, including Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, and instructed them to go out and commit murders that would shock the world. On the night of August 8, 1969, Manson ordered a group of family members to a house he had previously visited, the home of actress Sharon Tate and director Roman Polanski. Manson gave them one instruction: do what Tex tells you. Inside the home were 5 people: Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, her friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, and a young man named Stephen Parent, who arrived by chance. Under Tex Watson's direction and under Manson's ideology, the group murdered everyone in the house. The scene was brutal, chaotic, and senseless. Before leaving, they wrote messages on the walls in blood, symbols meant to suggest racial motives and spark fear throughout the country. News of the murders stunned the world. The next night, Manson decided to participate personally, not in the murders, but in choosing the victims and directing the attack. He led a group of family members to the Los Feliz home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. Once inside, he tied up the couple and left the house, instructing his followers to kill the victims and leave behind similar messages as the night before. The murders were carried out, and the family left the home filled with words like "rise," "death to pigs," and "Helter Skelter." With 2 crime scenes in 2 days, Los Angeles was plunged into fear and confusion. The Manson family didn't collapse because of the murders, at least not at first. Instead, the group began falling apart due to unrelated events. In October 1969, police raided Spahn Ranch on suspicion of auto theft. Manson and several others were arrested again, not for murder, but for stealing cars. While in custody, family member Susan Atkins began talking to a cellmate. She described the murders at the Tate residence in chilling detail. This confession eventually reached the authorities and led investigators to re-examine both crime scenes. Gradually, the pieces came together. By December 1969, Manson and several of his followers, including Atkins, Krenwinkel, Watson, and Leslie Van Houten, were indicted for the Tate-LaBianca murders. The trial of Charles Manson and the Manson family became one of the most publicized trials in American history. Manson entered the courtroom with an X carved into his forehead, which he later turned into a swastika. His followers stood outside the courthouse daily, singing songs and proclaiming his innocence. Inside, prosecutors argued that Manson was the mastermind behind the killings, that he manipulated his followers into murder to bring about Helter Skelter. Though the defense tried to claim that the family members acted on their own, the evidence of Manson's influence was overwhelming. In January 1971, Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were all convicted. Manson was sentenced to death, but California soon abolished the death penalty, converting his sentence to life imprisonment. Manson spent the rest of his life behind bars. He gave bizarre interviews, made contradictory statements, and continued to attract attention from the media. Inside prison, he was isolated, often disciplined, and never showed remorse. His influence faded over time as more details about his manipulation came to light. Charles Manson died on November 19, 2017, at the age of 83. The Manson murders marked the end of the 1960s era of peace and counterculture. They exposed how easily a charismatic figure could manipulate vulnerable individuals into violence. They influenced movies, books, and public perception of cults for decades to come. But the real tragedy lies in the victims, whose lives were cut short for reasons that made no sense, under a leader who created chaos for his own ego. Charles Manson's story is not just about one man's madness. It is about the danger of unchecked influence, the destructive power of manipulation, and how fear can spread from a single ideology. The Manson family's crimes shocked the nation, but they also taught us how vulnerable people can be to someone who promises purpose in exchange for obedience. This has been the story of Charles Manson, his life, his cult, his crimes, and the end of an era. If you like our content and want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below.